Welcome everyone to the first virtual lunch and learn of 2024. We are very excited to have three guest speakers to talk about gun violence as a labor union issue. To start off, we have Cynthia Phinney, president of the Maine AFL, and then we'll hear from Mellissa Carden from the Coalition Against Gun Violence, and then finally Mary Barden from NEA Rhode Island. Cynthia, I'm so glad that you're here today to have a perspective from a different state federation on this issue. Many of us may have heard the news back in October, on October 25th of 2023, when 18 people were fatally shot and 13 others were injured in an incident of mass gun violence. And this particular shooting had a very close to home impact on the unions in the state of Maine. So Mellissa, whenever you're ready, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that.
And I'm pleased to be here to join in this conversation. It's obviously a significant conversation for all of our states and for the nation, as you know, as our culture deals with this. Just for a little context about our state, we're a largely rural state. Long history and tradition of hunting. Many places in the state, many if not most people are comfortable with guns in the home and the culture. I do know that there are places that we have gun violence in Maine that aren't reported and that aren't visible to many people. But as a result of that, and as a result of the sort of largely cultural comfort level with it, I think prior to October 25th, as many people watched what was happening around the country over the last handful of years, that they felt it was somewhere else. And so it was October 25th that brought it home to us when, as you probably know, a shooter entered both a bowling alley and a bar. And when he was done, he killed 18 people and injured several others and ultimately killed himself. And that had a direct impact on several of our affiliates and therefore on us as a federation. And I should say at the Maine AFL-CIO, we have about 200 affiliate labor unions, and that's a swath of about 46,000 workers across our state of about 1.3 million people. We also have a couple of large unions in the state that aren't affiliated with us, so there are many more union members. And but on the night of the shooting, one of the members of one of our local IBEW unions, the electrical workers, their hall is right up the road from the bar. His father was visiting, and they'd had a beer at the bar before the union meeting, and he left his father at the bar while he went to the union meeting, expecting to go home with his father afterwards. And his father was one of those who was killed. And also I learned as we made calls to affiliates to find out who was impacted, or did people have members. And also it was interesting to me to learn that in these situations the White House actually reaches out to people like me to get information about what's happening on the ground. And I learned from them actually about a postal union that's not affiliated with us but is closely affiliated with one of our affiliates, that a postal worker had been killed. He was one of a group of a dozen deaf people who'd been out for a night of cornhole, which is a popular game in Maine, and 4 of those people were killed. One of them was the letter carrier. One of them was well-known and beloved interpreter for the deaf community and a former member of one of our affiliates, and also a very close friend of the wife of a president of one of our other affiliates. And the connections just go on and on. A beloved member of one of the unions that is made up of workers at our largest shipyard was killed, father with 2 young children, out for a night of cornhole himself, although not in the same game as the deaf folks. So the repercussions were immediate and wide. Another of our unions, although they didn't have members that were affected, a human resources professional that they negotiate with and had a very good relationship with and loved, was lost in the shooting. And also that letter carriers union that I mentioned earlier, for years, meeting place of their union was Shemenji's Bar. And so that shooting happened in their union home, which I just can't even imagine the impact of that. Our state convention was scheduled to be held the following 2 days, in the town that's a sister city, Lewiston, Auburn. A river runs through the middle. That's the only thing that divides the two towns. So our hotel was literally probably a 5 or less minute drive from the scene of the shooting. One of our national representatives had jogged by there 15 minutes before it happened. And of course, the entire county went on lockdown as the events unfolded. Many of our delegates were already at convention, and so were stranded in the hotel. A positive outcome of that was that quite a bunch of them were firefighters, so they are emergency responders. And so they took over one of the boardroom that we had reserved for workshops and set up shop there for the next week, and immediately joined the emergency response team. So it was good that they could do that. And also then, as our board met and talked about how to deal with this and heard from them, there was no food. There was no one to prepare food in the hotel. There were no restaurants that they could go out to, so they had no food. So some of the union brothers and sisters who lived nearby volunteered to bring them food at the hotel, and some others who lived further afield said that they could still go to the grocery store. So if those who were close by needed food to prepare to bring to the firefighters, they could do that. And I'm sure that there were countless incidents like that happening amongst the many communities or sub-communities that were impacted by that shooting. We obviously did not hold our convention because the lockdown didn't end until after our convention would have been over. We just had it last week on the 11th and 12th in the same hotel. And it was nice to gather and to pay tribute to those who were lost. And I look forward to your questions later in the program, but I wanted to share a couple of things. We did set up a fund, as did many in the community. There were many funds to assist because children were left behind, spouses were left behind. You know, when a breadwinner in a family loses their employment, in many cases, their health insurance is lost as well for that family, like immediately. So you not only have this tragedy, but you lose an income, you lose your health insurance, all kinds of things. And so there's just so many things to think about. So I want to share our website. We set up a fund to help with some of those and other expected and unexpected expenses. And also, if you go to our website, there's a search function. And if you search for Lewiston, which is the name of the city, or actually you get a better result with shooting, or Peyton, which is the name of one of the people who was killed, it will bring up several articles about the people who were impacted and about our response. So you can search for any of those terms. The second two give you less non-related results. But anyways, so I'm happy to share those things with you and happy to answer your questions later. But it was a really a big impact on our union family here in the state of Maine, and also I think a wake-up call for many of us in the state that the issue isn't just somewhere else. Of course, many people are already aware of that, but I think it's a wider, more widely felt now.
Great, thank you. And yeah, it's just so interesting to think that like union members from every angle are affected, not just those that were victims of this incidence of violence, but also that they are union brothers and sisters, the first on the scene to then have to deal with the immediate consequences of a violent action. And so to talk a little bit more from the policy end.
I did want to add one thing, sorry, that I meant to say. Although they were not union members, another thing that was top of mind for us was that there were workers there who went to work at the bar and at the bowling alley and who did not come home, or who did not come home whole. And of course, you know, a large part of our work is making sure that when people go to work that they come home safe and sound. And for some of those workers, that didn't happen. And even though they were not members of our federation, we feel that deeply and care deeply that not happen.
So now next to speak from a policy angle and from more bringing it back to Rhode Island, we have Mellissa Carden, the executive director for the Coalition Against Gun Violence. So can kick it off, Mellissa.
Okay. Well, first I want to say thanks for having me today, and thanks for this opportunity. My life is better because of unions. My grandfather was a Teamster. My mom was head of our household, and she's a retired teacher. My sister's a teacher. My life is better because of unions. So thank you. Okay, everybody can see my screen, right? Okay. So at the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence, we advocate for policies and actions that reduce gun violence. And I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly. There's a lot of data. There's a lot to digest, but we'll have time for questions at the end.
Mellissa Carden, please page the front desk 115. Mellissa, please close the front desk 115.
Okay, that's ironic that I'm being paged when I'm just about to start my presentation. Okay, so every day in the United States, 120 Americans are killed with guns and over 200 are shot or wounded. And to Cynthia's point, oftentimes we may remember those who are killed, but we don't often remember the ones who are wounded, whose lives are also changed forever. Lots of consequences from medical to trauma, mental health. So it's important to remember that. In Rhode Island, we have approximately 51 Rhode Islanders that are killed every year and approximately 165 who are injured by gun violence. The majority, about 60% of those deaths are gun suicides, and that's pretty much nationwide. About 2/3 of gun violence in the United States is gun suicide. Gun violence is now the #1 killer of children and teens in the country. It historically was motor vehicle deaths, but as of 2020, that has changed. So what we call the big lie is that you'll often hear the myth that guns don't kill people, but people kill people. But really the fact and the data says that the more guns that there are means the more gun deaths and the more injuries. It's just the mere presence of a gun means there will be more gun deaths. Cynthia was mentioning the culture in Maine of guns. In Rhode Island, it's a little bit different for those of us who've grown up here. We know that compared to other states, we don't have as much of a culture of guns. Overall, we have relatively low gun ownership compared to other parts of the country, and that is something that just buffers us in a way, just because it's not as much a part of our culture as it is in other states. So the United States gun homicide rate is 26 times that of other high-income countries. So this chart, shows you it's an American problem for the most part. Access to a gun triples the risk of death by suicide. So just having a gun in the home, everyone in the home is 3 times more at risk for gun suicide, which is why secure storage of firearms is so important, which is one of our priorities for this year legislatively. Black Americans are 12 times more likely than white Americans to die by gun homicide. So it's important to mention that although mass shootings get much of the media attention, Black and brown people are disproportionately affected by gun violence. So some statistics about gun violence in the workplace. Sorry, I just have to fix my screen here. Okay. So workplace violence, and this is from a press release at the end of 2022 from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Workplace violence is a pressing issue. Work homicides accounted for around 9% of all workplace fatalities. Women workers were disproportionately killed by workplace homicide, accounting for 14.5% of homicides, despite representing only 8.6% of workplace deaths overall. And there has been an increase in gun violence in the workplace, resulting in 387 of the 481 workplace homicides. So 387 were by gun homicide, the highest since 2016. Whoops, hold on. Okay, can you guys still hear me? Because I thought my mute, okay, sorry. So a few more statistics. Each year, approximately 400 to 500 homicides occur while victims are at work. And about 80% of those were classified as intentional shootings. This research comes from the Boston College Social Work and Economics researchers, which were published in the American Journal of Public Health. They found that states that toughened their firearms policies overall saw declines in the rate of workplace homicide. And I think that this is an important quote, regardless of your position on gun control versus gun rights. And we usually say gun safety as opposed to gun control, because our goal is not to take guns away from responsible gun owners. But we all can agree that nobody should be killed at work. That's a fundamentally unjust and preventable event. So a reality for employers is that they need to be aware of the law when it comes to gun policies. And part of this is because, the most common sites for mass shootings were the current or former workplaces of perpetrators. So again, it's important to remember that, again, mass shootings are only about 1% of gun violence in the country, but they do get the most attention. And when they looked at the second most common location for mass shootings, it was retail locations, which represented about 17% of the mass shootings. And then the third most common location was restaurants and bars, which represented about 13% of all recorded mass shootings. So this is why employers need to be aware of the legal ramifications with so many more guns in circulation and so much more gun violence. So we have the power to make social change. There is hope on this issue if we think about other issues like marriage equality or cigarettes. These are all issues that where the cultural norms have changed. And so it is possible. With some issues, it takes longer than other issues to create social and cultural change. You can think about anything from wearing seatbelts, to marriage equality, to drinking and driving, to cigarettes. I mean, there's lots of examples, but there is hope, and there are a lot of people who are working on this cultural change. A lot of those people are young people, and particularly after the Parkland shooting in Florida, many young people wanted to take action on this issue because it was affecting them in schools. And it's something that's on parents' minds. It's something that's on teachers' minds, and we'll hear more from Mary about that too. But so young people are getting more involved because this is an issue that's important to them and affects them personally. So for our two legislative priorities, they were the same last year. It's strengthening our secure gun storage bill. And that helps for suicides, as I mentioned. And it also helps for school shootings, because the majority of school shooters get their guns from home or from a relative. It also helps for unintentional shootings, which account for about 8% of all gun violence, where a child gains access to an unsecured firearm and kills a sibling or themselves or a friend. And so this strengthens that law. And one of the things it does is it requires gun shops to post information about secure storage. And what secure storage means is that you lock up both your firearm and the ammunition, both locked up and both stored separately. That's what secure storage is. In addition to the gun shops, it would require the Department of Ed to send out information about secure storage to all the school districts for them to distribute to all the households of kids. We also, this is the 11th year that we've been trying to pass an assault weapons ban, and it is a priority again this year. And there's 10 states in the District of Columbia that do have assault weapons bans now, and Connecticut and Massachusetts are two of them. So being our neighbors, that's important for us to also have it. There have been recent examples where there was an example at the end of the year where a gentleman from Massachusetts was faking a Pawtucket address to buy assault weapons. And so we don't want to be known as the place where people come to buy their assault weapons. So some ways to take action for people who don't know who their legislators are. There's the Secretary of State website that you can go to, put in your address, and all of your lawmakers come up. You can also join us and get regular emails from us at the coalition to find out what's happening on this issue. If you do know your legislator, write or call them and tell them that gun safety is important to you. We also have a meeting coming up on Monday night. If you'd like me to send you the link, I can do that. My email address is here. And we have a Valentine's Not Violence postcard writing campaign coming up, and we'll be at the State House on February 8th from 3:30 to 5, writing postcards, again, asking our legislators to please prioritize these two bills.
So my name's Mary Barden. I'm the Executive Director of the National Education Association Rhode Island. We are a union that represents K-12 teachers, but also K-12 educational support professionals, so teacher assistants, custodians, IT, clerical folks in the K-12 world. We also represent a number of higher ed faculty, support staff at the community college here, but also at RISD, Roger Williams, and some folks down at URI. So I will focus a bit on the K-12 because that's where my personal experience comes from, but I always want to recognize that our higher education folks and our members there are equally as impacted by these issues. We also represent municipal employees who often sometimes face these issues, as well as our members, our state employees at the Department of Health, who are often super helpful on these issues around what's the impact and what's actually happening on the ground. In terms of my own personal experience, I spent 20 years in the classroom, 2 of them at Davies Career and Technical High School, but the majority of my career as an 8th grade social studies teacher at Davisville Middle School. And so the impact of gun violence it's really hard to say like how much that has been, and the impact of the trauma on our students and our educators, it just cannot be understated. 2023, the United States had the most school shootings in a single year. And there have been 394 school shootings since Columbine. And the most recent school shooting was on January 11th, and there have already been 3 school shootings this year. Schools are workplaces for our folks, and this is a workplace safety issue as much as and equally important as the learning environment for our students, so that they all can come to school and come to work and feel safe, and that every educator and all our folks feel, and they deserve to feel safe at work. It has transformed the role of educators in the classroom. I think, you talk to folks who got involved in teaching, it is to educate students because they're nurturers, and we often have become first responders as well in these situations and in preparing for them. And the trauma of that on our folks and on our students is immense. I mentioned Columbine earlier because I started teaching in an environment, what I call pre-Columbine, the time before kind of massive school shootings. And I really started my career in 1997 and in North Kingstown prior to that. And Columbine really changed the landscape for all of us and changed the way that we began to prepare for school shootings in the K-12 environment in particular. And so it really altered the school culture and our school communities in this way that our students, our staff, our faculty kind of live in this constant fear. It is something that it's something we talk about all the time. It is something we try to address as much as possible. And I'll also say that it's something that's dealt with on a community by community basis. And we can talk about some of those things if people have some questions about that. But, you know, nationally, I've been to a lot of conferences. It's usually a topic of conversation: school safety, gun violence, school shootings. And there's a wide, you know, array of ways that school communities are addressing this. But I think, you know, and I'll talk a little bit at the end about, you know, the mental health supports that we need in schools to support students, and some things that we can do that are the not hardening of the schools. So since Columbine, we prepare for active shooters in schools, and you've probably heard about that. Unless you've experienced an active shooter drill with students, it's really hard to convey how traumatic that is and how difficult it is. I mean, I taught 8th graders, so at least, you know, there's some sense of being able to explain to them what's happening. I have friends and colleagues who teach little ones, and those experiences are really hard to explain to small children about. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? And I also, in those things, think about our special educators and our special education students, our students who are already suffering from trauma, perhaps from gun violence in their homes. And then this is kind of a re-traumatization as we prepare. And I'm not saying we don't need to somehow prepare, but I think that and some of the research, which I'll talk about in a minute, shows that there is a significant negative impact in the way that we're currently kind of preparing for this. And yeah, sitting in a locked classroom, having to pull the shades down, trying to get students kind of to huddle in a specific area. The shooter drills I did, we had police come, they would, you know, try to get into the classroom. It's extremely traumatic. And no matter the age of the students, whether it's kindergarten students or high school students, they have a negative impact. And there is some anecdotal evidence that there is increases in depression, stress, anxiety, physiological health problems from these. And there's also the exhaustion, I think, on our members' parts of having to explain why we need to do this, especially to our little ones. And for our educational support professionals who have to work with our special needs students in these situations and during these drills. And the other piece of it is we not only have to do the preparation piece, but we also, when these events happen, particularly with our older students, I would say our middle school students or our high school students, you know, they come into school, even the little ones, with questions like, you know, what happened in that situation? What happened, you know, and even when we had, you know, a student, I think it was in Virginia, who brought the gun to school and shot his teacher. And so students come to class, and so there is also that added burden on our folks of having to have those conversations at the same time, be the adults in the room and say, why is this continuing to happen? I think is a hard place to be in. And so our folks are, as well as the students, are, you know, exhausted, they're tired, they're angry. And the answer is certainly not more hardening of schools. Gun violence continues to rise in our schools despite our increases in security and law enforcement and active shooter drills. And so those things have continued to increase significantly since Columbine. There was a drop off, of course, during the pandemic, but the last couple of years, those numbers have almost doubled since pre-pandemic, the number of school shootings. So as we look at lockdown drills and active shooter drills, we know that there's research that these have a negative impact, and there's a potential that they cause harm to our students and teachers. And so our focus is really looking at developing supportive and nurturing school environments, being aware of the signs and the warning signs that happen prior, particularly when students are involved. And of course, and I'll you know, passing and enforcing common sense gun legislation, which Mellissa talked about, and we're entirely in support of. I'll put something in the chat. I don't want to talk too much about it, but there was research that was sponsored by Everytown for Gun Safety, the National Education Association, and the American Federation of Teachers on the impact of active shooter drills. And some of it was a little bit anecdotal, but I think that, you know, that impact on mental health of students, teachers, and parents who go through these things can't be understated. And there's one thing as I was looking through and kind of preparing for this, and out of that research, they had a lot of quotes from teachers and parents, and there's one that I'll just read it to you because it really stuck with me about the active shooter drills. And this parent said, after a drill, my kindergarten son told me, "Mom, I was really worried though, because the classroom baby chickens will chirp and tell the bad man that we're in there. I started bawling. That was one of the reasons she joined Mom's Demand, because my son shouldn't be worried about the chickens telling the bad man where he is." So it's super difficult and super hard. And so that just kind of hits home, even for our little ones, what that trauma is. And so certainly, again, it's not about that we shouldn't be doing some prevention in terms of school shooters, and but we want to make sure that those things don't mimic actual incidents, that parents and students have advance notice, that there's age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate content and discussions that are going on with school-based mental health professionals. And I'll also say, you know, preventing gun violence is a priority both for the National Education Association and NEA Rhode Island. It's actually on the cover of our Nationals magazine this month that's coming out. It has all the names of all the locales where school shootings have occurred, and the title of the article is "This Can Change: An Educator's Take on Gun Violence." So this is something that impacts our members every day, and you know, 2 years ago, as folks said, with a very wide and broad coalition that included multiple labor unions, because this isn't just, it's not just a teacher issue. You know, we have other union folks here in our virtual room. And so it took all of us to come together to say that this was important. And it was a pretty proud day that brothers and sisters in all the unions were there to stand up for that. And so, I think just the last thing I'll say is, and I think Rep. Boylan is here. I think I saw her jump on earlier, but I just wanted to recognize the efforts too statewide. There's a legislative study commission that's evaluating and providing recommendations on mandated safety protocols for schools, and they're looking at, and we have someone that serves on that, and they're looking at that. And so I just wanted to recognize those efforts as well as we look at what is it that we need to do in terms of what does it mean to be prepared, but how do we make sure that we're not continuing to traumatize our students and our teachers at the same time. And so, again, I'll just say it's not just K-12 educators, college faculty and staff. When you look at the list of places where gun violence has occurred, I know Dominic's on here, grocery store workers, postal service workers, food service workers, malls, casinos, hospitals, nursing homes. This is a workers' safety issue. It's a workplace safety issue. And we look forward to continuing to work with our brothers and sisters and other unions and to pass the common sense gun legislation that Mellissa talked about earlier. So, and we're in full support of that. So I'm happy to take questions too.
Great. And before I open it up for any more questions, I believe that Cynthia just had one more thing to add.
Thank you, Autumn. Yes, I really appreciate Mary talking about the impact on teachers in their workplace and the students. And I mentioned earlier the firefighters who were able to be on the scene and help, but also there's the other side of that. So the firefighters union actually sent in trauma counselors for them to assist them with what they had to see and deal with over that week of working on that event. And one of our affiliates also is the Maine State Nurses Association, and while the hospital in Lewiston is not currently unionized, I do have a friend who works there, and she came home from work. She was working, and she came home from work that night and basically cried for the entire next day, which she has never, ever in her career done before. And so the impact on healthcare providers, which is, you know, extremely traumatic for folks who are not used to dealing with this. And if you are used to dealing with it, I think it just must require some unhealthy level of numbness to be able to function. And so that is also workplace impact to consider.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great, it really is just on every single level, something that deeply impacts workers and their families. And we don't want people to go to work. We don't want people to go to school, kids to go to school afraid. And that's really, like, when we're talking about reducing violence, we don't want people to live in a constant state of fear. I'm going to stop the recording in a second, but I just wanted to, again, plug Labor Vision, which is the online media resource where we will be posting the recordings of this and all future Lunch and Learns. And if you never want to miss a segment, which you shouldn't, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. It's at Labor Vision RI. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Labor Vision TV 1. And in follow-up communications as well, I'll be posting the link.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments.